It doesn't make sense. In fact, it might be more accurate to say it's maddening. What in God's name are we to make of this story? A house manager accused of squandering a wealthy landowner's property is called to account and invents a scheme to save his own skin by ingratiating himself to the sharecroppers working the rich man's land by forgiving a portion of their debts. The stage is set here for a showdown of judgment from the rich man, punishment for the manager, casting him out into outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. But in a shocking twist, the landowner praises the manager for his shrewdness and retains him as an employee. Our minds are already spinning when Jesus proclaims, "The children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. So I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth, so when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes." What the? Did I hear that right? Jesus commended the manager's shrewdness and behavior and then told us to make friends with dishonest wealth? It's a funny joke, Luke. What did you do with the real Jesus? Already, Jesus has our heads pivoting on a swivel like we're watching the U.S. Open when he puts the final cherry on the top of this complex story by stating, "No one can serve two masters. You will either hate one or love the other. You cannot serve both God and wealth." Well, at least that sounds like Jesus. But how in the world did we get here from this story? This parable and its meaning are both vexing and confounding. Perhaps that is why in 362 AD, the emperor of Rome wrote a nasty essay about the church where he claimed that this parable in Luke 16 is evidence that Jesus is despicable and Christianity is an inferior religion. This is the most controversial parable in history. No other has baffled interpreters in the same way. One scholar who spent 40 years studying parables, basically his entire academic career, said it's not only the most difficult parable, but the most elusive story in the Bible. Rudolf Bultmann, the foremost New Testament scholar of the 20th century, declared it incomprehensible. Robert Funk of the Jesus Seminar admitted, "There's no way that anyone would invent such a terrible parable. Therefore," and I love this, "it must be the genuine words of Jesus." Well, that's nice. I guess we should be comforted that one of the few things that we can be sure Jesus said is completely unintelligible. This story stretches the limits of our imagination and challenges the very definition of what we imagine a parable is supposed to be and do. Scholars have offered many different theories of parables over the years. Some believe parables teach a singular truth. Others say that they teach many different truths at the same time. Still others claim that parables obscure the truth intentionally. And lastly, there are those like the scholar John Dominic Crossan, familiar to many of you for his time here, who argues that parables undermine the truth. To be a parable, according to Crossan, a story must undermine the dominant myths of society through a break in language that allows us to see the world more clearly and to make an accurate assessment of our existence today. We come to see our truest selves when we are in moments of crisis. And parables provoke these heightened experiences by opening windows onto the strange mystery of God's presence in the world. Through these parabolic revelations and apocalypses and disclosures, our tidy and neat theologies and pretensions of righteousness are laid bare. Parables undermine the truth in order to liberate the truth from the ideologies of our age, overturning our commonly held assumptions about the world, shocking our conscience into an existential reckoning. Crossan says that Jesus' death on the cross becomes the parable of all parables, undermining the truth of the empire itself. And like all parables, it is still widely misunderstood by the church to this day. One scholar has said that no one would crucify a teacher who told pleasant stories that enforce a prudential morality. So something must be going on here that is more than meets the eye. Perhaps whenever we read a parable, we should begin by asking the question, what truth does this story undermine? What settled agreements does it overturn? One of the fundamental truths that I believe this parable undermines is that we're all trapped. The world tells us we're all trapped. We're all stuck, and there's no way out. It is what it is, this world. The way it is today is the way it's always been and the way it will always be. Nothing's ever going to change or get any better. The way that our jobs are right now, our relationships, our lives are going, that's how they're always going to be. And we just need to learn to accept the reality for what it is. You can call it despair if you want, or apathy, nihilism, or indifference. It's just the feeling that nothing we do is going to matter. The situation we're in is going to be the situation we're in. The life we're living, the world we find ourselves in at this very moment is simply inevitable. Have you ever felt trapped? Really trapped? Have you ever felt trapped in a job or trapped at work? Have you ever felt trapped in a home, in a relationship, a marriage, a family that doesn't respect you or understand you? Have you ever felt trapped in a financial situation, didn't look like there was any way out of, or in crippling debt, trapped by your own mistakes in life? Have you ever felt trapped in your own body, in a body that doesn't work for you, a body you don't love very much? Have you ever felt trapped in a healthcare situation or a caregiving role? Have you ever felt trapped in a system that seems to hurt you and benefit others, or hurts others and benefits you? Have you ever felt trapped in our two-party politics, or a country hanging on to democracy by a thread? Have you ever felt trapped in an economy that divides the haves from the have-nots, or a world on the brink of ecological ruin? Have you ever felt trapped in a religion that has lost its way in the world, or a faith that seems to be in precipitous decline? At some point in our lives, we all experience being trapped. And there's nothing worse than that feeling. It is this claustrophobic experience, like the walls are closing in on us and we're hyperventilating because we can't breathe. We can't catch our breath. People do strange things when they're trapped. Many are immobilized by it and become fatalistic, believing everything is determined and there's no way out. But that's not the message of the Gospels, is it? Or the picture that Jesus paints for us in the parables, especially our parable today. If anyone was ever trapped in an impossible situation, it was the manager in this story. The wealthy landowner said, "What is this I hear about you?" An interesting turn of phrase. It means that there were charges brought against the manager which come from a second-hand source. The Greek in this story, I won't bore you with it, but it infers that there was a false accusation made with hostile intent to slander the manager and destroy his reputation. We might call them trumped-up charges. And the implication is that the manager was being undermined, possibly by someone competing for increased power, spreading rumors, trying to gain more of the rich man's business. Furthermore, the accusation is a little suspicious. Whoever was talking to the rich man said the manager was squandering his property. But this parable follows right on the heels of the prodigal son and has almost the exact same plot. And that's the only other place in the Greek where the word is translated squandering, diakopaizon. Everywhere else it's translated as scattering, as in the seed the farmer scattered in the parable of the sower, or like Mary, who used the same verb in the Magnificat when she sang about God scattering the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. So what's going on here? Is the manager scattering, redistributing, or squandering the rich man's property? Might be important to know. Regardless, though, of whether the rumor was true or not, the manager knew he was going to be fired either way. You know how this goes. Somebody says something. The wealthy landowner had no reason anymore to trust him. He knew that losing his job also would be a death sentence for him, because In his own words, he was not strong enough to dig, and he was ashamed to beg. And yet, this apocalyptic moment of crisis caused the manager to develop an ingenious plan. Something that's hidden in the text that we don't see on the surface. In the first century, wealthy landowners leased out their property to sharecroppers who signed contracts indebting themselves to the landowner for the purpose of using the land to grow crops. At the end of each season, the majority of the harvest was required to be provided back to the landowner to pay the debt for the use of the land, and then the remaining crop would be kept by the sharecroppers to support their families. There's only one catch. These landowners were not ignorant people. To avoid losing money in years of famine, or bad crops, or poor agriculture, or inattentive farming, landowners employed managers to oversee operations. These managers were literate people who wrote contracts and found a way to cover the landowners' liabilities and their own salaries in the process through something called hidden interest. Hidden interest was a common practice in the first century. In fact, we know, for instance, the hidden interest on olive oil across the board was 50%. And the hidden interest on wheat, 20%. So the strategy the manager employed in this parable was to cancel all the hidden interest on the sharecroppers' harvest of oil and wheat, forgiving a massive portion of their debts, leaving himself without a salary, yet indebting himself to the sharecroppers so that when he was fired by the landowner, the farmers would welcome him into their homes. It was not only a well-calculated strategy, it was also a wise and resourceful way out of his predicament, as well as a refusal to remain trapped in the landowner's economic authority, undermining the hierarchical arrangement of human relationships in society at that time. Even though the manager lost his reputation and was on the verge of being fired, even though he thought he would be reduced to digging or begging and die in poverty, even though he thought all was lost and nothing left, even though he was trapped in an impossible situation, the manager still had two tools at his disposal that he pulled out to change his life: wisdom and forgiveness. This strange and confounding parable reveals that whenever we are trapped, there are often two cards up our sleeves that we've forgotten about. Two practices that we often ignore that have tremendous power to completely rearrange a situation, transform human relationships, and provide a way where it looks like there is no way. It certainly is not easy to be wise or forgiving, is it? It can be exhausting to be wise and strategic. It can be a pride-swallowing siege to be forgiving. In fact, it can be one of the most difficult things in the world to try and forgive. Yet if we can muster up the strength and the resources, we might just find, like this story, a sacred, divine, transcendent potential and world-altering energy embedded in these two activities: wisdom and forgiveness. We live today in a VUCA world. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. VUCA. This acronym was first incorporated into military education at the U.S. Army War College to describe the world created as a result of the Cold War. In 1991, at a conference entitled Developing Strategic Leadership, Herbert Barber claimed all leadership training needs to be reconceptualized through the understanding that we are living in a VUCA world. What did they mean by VUCA? Volatile. We are in a constant and rapid process of change. Complex. A multitude of forces are bearing down on decisions, creating confusion. Ambiguous. Hard to get a read on truth or fact because of a general haziness. Uncertain. There's little predictability and many surprises. Does this sound familiar at all? It perfectly describes the world we've come to know since 9/11. Environmental catastrophe, housing crisis, economic recessions, church decline, political division, economic disparity, the rise of white nationalism, a global pandemic, the erosion of civil rights, and the twilight of democracy. That makes the world volatile, complex, uncertain, ambiguous. Today we face complicated decisions and sometimes conflicting goals at the same time. Safety, concern for neighbor, economic opportunity, social connection, personal freedom. In a VUCA world, there's no one simple thing to do that everyone will agree on. Everything's a catch-22, and it feels like we're trapped and there's no way out. But as Albert Einstein once said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that we use to create them. Bill George, a professor at Harvard Business School, argues that a VUCA world calls for a corresponding leadership response of vision, understanding, courage, and adaptability. These are the attributes he claims we need to face a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And it seems that Jesus would agree. He told his disciples at one point to be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves, and praised the children of this age as being more shrewd in their dealing with each other than are the children of light. What is commended in this parable is not just shrewdness, quick thinking, cunning, craftiness, resourcefulness, but action born of wisdom. Specifically, the wise use of possessions in a time of crisis. Wisdom calls us to use our wealth and resources astutely with a view toward the future we want to build for ourselves and our children. When the world becomes volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, the followers of Jesus are called to become wiser and more strategic in how we use everything we have at our disposal. If we are feeling trapped today, trapped in a body, trapped in a job, trapped in a relationship, in a family, in an economic situation, in a school, in a city, in a nation, in a religion, in a system, in a world gone mad, perhaps this parable is for us. What is the wisdom we need for the impossible moment we face right now as individuals, as couples, as families, as a city, as a church? What's the wisdom we need as a nation, as a world? We know that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. What is the shrewd path for us now? What is practical wisdom saying to us? In the book of Proverbs, it says that wisdom cries out in the streets. In the squares, she raises her voice. At the busiest corner, she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates, she speaks and asks, "How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple?" Wisdom is calling to us in the traps that we find ourselves in. But will we listen? The manager had the ability to wipe away the farmer's interest, which means he had the resources at his disposal to secure a future for himself. And in the end, his shrewd actions turned out to benefit everyone, including the wealthy landowner, obviously, or he would have been fired. Because the wealthy landowner received payment from the sharecropper's harvest and now had a new debt with the sharecroppers. And his name was ringing out in the village as generous and virtuous. It was a new day for the landowner as well. But it wasn't just the manager's practical wisdom that resolved this conundrum. Wisdom alone cannot save us. We have to put our wisdom into action. And the action the manager chose was forgiveness. I know our world sees forgiveness as weak and foolish today, or worse, as a form of cheap grace. It can be a tool perpetrators demand from their victims to continue to harm them. A toxic ideology of forgiveness has been used and abused by Christians for centuries. And that was never really about forgiveness, though, was it? It was about securing impunity, avoiding accountability, rejecting responsibility, and demanding absolution without repairing what was broken. Yet we see none of these attributes in the manager in this story. He acted as if the rumors against him were consequential, even if they were not corroborated by a second witness. He did not expect to keep his job. He expected to be dismissed and cast out into the streets. He did not protest. He knew accountability was coming, and yet he took responsibility anyway, created a strategy, and engaged in radical acts of forgiveness, a forgiveness that created a whole new way forward. Gandhi once wrote, "The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong." John Green also said, "The way out of the labyrinth of suffering is to forgive." So no matter whether we are trapped in a body, a job, a relationship, a family, an economic situation, an unjust system, a failing nation, or all of the above at the same time, there is always a way out. Yes, capital has come to replace community as the center of our national story today, and it threatens to destroy all of our relationships and our environment, but there's still a way out. Biblically speaking, forgiveness always involves an economic component. Because truth be told, all our relationships, interpersonal, social, and communal, have economic dimensions. Forgiveness is always, biblically, a spiritual and financial activity. To refuse to forgive is to subject oneself to financial ruin. Just ask anyone who's ever gone through a painful divorce. No matter how volatile, uncertain, complex, or ambiguous the situation is, there's always a way out. And that way almost always begins with forgiveness. Not just interpersonal forgiveness, but economic forgiveness, the forgiveness of other people's debts. It's no surprise Jesus praised the manager in this story. Jesus loved the forgiveness of debts. They said it over and over and over again. It's in the Lord's Prayer. It's in his mission statement in Luke 4. The forgiveness of all debts, every kind of debt, was Jesus' mission on earth, the fundamental principle of the kingdom of God. It was the strategy Jesus always chose to make a way where there is no way. We follow a God. We follow a God who has seen no trap that she does not want to overturn. We follow a God who makes a way where there is no way. Our God, they say, is a waymaker. Our God made a way for Abraham and Sarah when there was no way out of old age, no way forward. Our God made a way for Hagar when there was no way out of slavery. Our God made a way for Israel when there was no way out of Egypt. Our God made a way for Joseph when there was no way out of the pit that he was thrown down in. Our God made a way for Tamar and Rahab and Ruth and Bathsheba when there was no way out of the patriarchal world that they found themselves in. Our God made a way for Mary when there was no way out of being poor and pregnant and unmarried. Our God made a way for Jesus when there was no way out of the cross. All through the Bible and human history, God used mercy and grace and forgiveness to make a way where there is no way. These are the tools that God loves to use to break us out of the traps that our lives and our world has constructed for us. Whatever impossible situation we find ourselves trapped in today, God can make a way for us. There's no trap too big or too volatile, uncertain, complex, or ambiguous for God. But God cannot do it alone. God asks for our help. We can't sit around and wait for a miracle to drop out of the sky. God has already given us the tools that we need. Jesus has shown us in this story. Whenever we are trapped, all we have to do is pick up the tools of wisdom in one hand and forgiveness in the other. Start clawing our way out of the darkness until God breaks open a doorway that we can walk through together into a brighter future. Amen.